everybody, and welcome to my second and final part of the Victorian house architecture facts in history. I'm Mary, and this video quite sums up all the information that surrounds the world in the matter of Victorian period. As I did in the last video, I'm going to keep on furnishing the house, from the ground floor and basement to the first floor. And in the last part of this video, there will be kind of a cinematic view of the rooms, pointing out once again the details. So let's get into that historical and interesting part. Let me tell you something about the end of the marriages in the 19th century and before. Divorce didn't exist in those times, as there was no paper to sign when you no longer wanted to live with your married one. So wife selling became a completely legitimate way to get out of a marriage, and it continued well through the 9th century, particularly in rural Britain. Wife sales could happen in public or in private. Like you go to the market, buy your groceries, and someone sells his wife, and there is a public watching it. But the public sales were quite the spectacle. The husband typically put some kind of lead rope on his unwanted wife, took her to a public square and asked for offers. Prices varied. It is said that one wife was sold in Shelby in 1862 for a pint of beer, while others seems to have gone for a decent amount of cash. But leaving that behind, not the wife, but the idea, let's talk about something happier that brought joy to the Victorian times. The Christmas holiday. The practice of putting up a Christmas tree is in part thanks to Albert, the husband of famous Queen Victoria. Born and raised in Germany, where the Christmas tree was common, Albert brought the iconic Christmas symbol to the English population by decorating Windsor Castle in 1840. Another Christmas traditions that originated in the 19th century included exchanging gifts, giving Christmas cards, and pulling Christmas crackers. That is really nice, sharing traditions. Who would have thought that such a great and happy holiday could have been brought to England in such a dark and morbid times? If you're still talking about happy or more funny things, let me tell you that whether you were sick, pregnant, or just a child, beer was generally safer to drink than water. By 1860, the Thames River was full of raw fecal matter and sewage that was dumped into the water on a daily basis. Since the river was also the main source of drinking water for the city, people died by the thousands from dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. Once again, for people in the Victorian era, this was a great excuse to drink beer. Also, it was common for the nobility to adorn their bodies. It all started when Queen Victoria's son, Edward VII, and the Prince of Wales visited Jerusalem. He saw someone getting a tattoo and decided to get one of his own. With this decision, he started a huge trend. Some estimates say that almost 100,000 people across the United Kingdom got tattoos in the 19th century. In the matter of clothing, pink clothes for girls and blue clothes for boys is a relatively recent idea. Because in the Victorian times, all genders of children would wear frilly white dresses until they reached school age. The richer a family was, the more bells and whistles, aka ribbons, bows, or buttons, the dresses would have. Both genders also wear bonnets, so that is why we see in the old photos little boys wearing dresses and many accessories along with their sisters. Now, one thing that really made sense in those times and is used even nowadays is the way they clean their teeth. Not with toothpaste, as this didn't exist then, but with a mixture of charcoal and honey. At least they took good care of their smiles, because I bet their faces cried a little bit every time they massaged it with ammonia. Also, fun fact, makeup in those times was considered gauche or inelegant for a society woman to wear, as it was used mostly by sex workers. One judge even proclaimed that lipstick was similar to witchcraft, in that it had the ability to seduce men. And I guess they were speaking of MAC Ruby Woo shade. Well, we have to admit that the Victorian era was a great time of invention that came with the Industrial Revolution. The radio and the telephone were invented in the late 19th century. Other notable inventions made in the Victorian Britain included the camera, the television, the vacuum, and most importantly, the toilet. But as I said earlier, there were people unlucky enough to lose their lives because of these inventions, which weren't studied enough. I guess you heard about all the explosions that took place in the Victorian kitchens, as people turned on the light while the gas was still open, and so on. That was tragic. Mostly the wealthy ones had to sacrifice themselves, for they had the money to buy all the new gadgets, but had no idea what was the risk of using all of them. But they were also funny in the lifespan that they had. Victorians believed that digestion could be aided by standing in the dark, and so dining rooms were built in the basement, close to the kitchen. At least they got to eat the food that they could barely see while it was still hot. In later years, the room was moved to the first floor, but based on knowledge gleaned only from Downton Abbey, servants still took their meals in the basement. I guess everybody knows that this hysteria with little tiny waists and hourglass type of body is not a recent trend. Corsets made from whalebone and sometimes even iron or steel helped women achieve the impossibly tiny waists that were fashionable at the time, as they are today. But an ugly side effect of these binding garments was that circulation could be cut off and women would have trouble breathing, which I heard let women faint all over England. And I don't know what to think about that because, women's body shapes were spectacular due to those corsets, but they were far from the perfect shape. As the internal organs were so cramped, no airflow could be found there, and that is too much to ask from a person. Not to say that there were cases when women wore this body shaper as a personal preference, not because the husband asked them to do so. As you know, women had no right in choosing for themselves in those times. But as I said earlier, they were not that much into science and knowledge as they were into superficiality, into how rich they look like, and so on. And that is how your wife goes to the groceries and comes back way too late. Not because she's cheating, she just fainted from the corset. All that dread and haunted kind of shade that the late 19th century gives you is for certain due to the pictures of those days. It was common in the Victorian age to have photographs of loved ones taken after they died. Families in the Victorian Britain would pose with the dead with tykes that seemed to be sleeping and young ladies who seemed to recline. This practice was especially popular with children who died. Tragically, these strange 19th century photographs were seen as a family's last chance to have a permanent likeness of their lost child. It was the Victorian period that gave us such great works of terror as Dracula and the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Even the Americans got in on the act with Edgar Allan Poe producing some of the greatest Gothic literature of the time. The Victorians knew how to frighten people and they knew how to do it in grand style. These works steal from the basis of much modern horror, and their power to thrill has not dwindled in the least. As now I show you the cinematic view, I will be glad to know what is your opinion, guys, about this house and its rooms. What's your favorite one? Mine are definitely the living room and the study room, as the game let me associate a multitude of furniture made of wood with a very floral wallpaper. These rooms are outlined by the details as the curtains, chimney, wall decorations, rugs, frills, and others. So once again, the most important details of a Victorian house are the staircases, which were very narrow because of the height of the foundation or the ceiling, windows which were made up of 4 or 6 panes fixed to the runners, which were called the sash windows, or often homes would have bay windows either circular or rectangular. There are a lot of details on the horizontal plan, such as trim and decorative wood sculptures. There's also a emphasis on vertical elements. Homes often stood at 2 or 3 stories with tall windows and porches, and the detailed ornamentation that almost bordered on over the top. And finally, we move on the roof, which the same has some details on it. We have the fireplace chimneys, which were quite many in these types of houses, mostly because in those times the open fire was the only source of heat for the rooms. So this is it, guys, the way I created a Victorian house in The Sims 4. I hope you enjoyed watching this and listening to the teeny tiny information I brought into discussion about the Victorian era. I invite you to keep an eye on my channel, as I'm about to do more videos like this on some of the other architectural designs. And thank you for watching. Bye bye!